Hey, I'm Nick DiMatteo, and welcome to Season 8, Episode 10 of Music is Not a Genre, MxG. It's cool that I'm now doing these hand gestures with actual live people. If you saw the last two interviews, you know that I'm teaching people to do it now, so it's going to be a movement. There's going to be millions of people doing this all over the world or something like that. This week's topic is nostalgia, the silent killer. This is Music is Everything number 38, and I will explain all of that in a second. But first, as always, thank you for watching and listening. Listeners, go to youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre. You get a video for every episode of this podcast. Watchers, go to nickdimatteo.com/musicisnotagenre if you would rather just listen. And everyone, go to patreon.com/musicisnotagenre to support this podcast, my band Rec, and everything I do. And until January 1st, I may extend it. We'll see. But until January 1st, you can get in. Patreon, $1 a month gets you all the perks. There are no tiers. Everybody pays what they can pay, which I appreciate and love. And thank you, Patreon people. If you are someone who can pay $1 a month, then please go to patreon.com/musicisnotagenre. And of course, as always, like, share, subscribe, rate, review, lather, rinse, repeat. Do it all, please. It only takes a second for you, but it really matters a lot to indie creators like me. And of course, I have a song coaching business, The Song Coach, nickdimatteo.com/The Song Coach. If you are someone who's struggling to write a song, who's never written a song, who's written most of a song, doesn't know how to finish it, whatever your story is, I can help you with that. I've been doing it for decades with many, many, many artists and people and even non-artists. So nickdimatteo.com/The Song Coach to check that out. And as always, some singles. The most recent single is You Know You're Right, No Fun Pushy Mix. It's a remix of the Kite to Camden single, You Know You're Right, Rec's epic album from this year. And it is the last official related release to that album, Kite to Camden. Please go to nickdimatteo.com/music, and it has all the links. You can check out the discography, the live, the credits, social, all of that on nickdimatteo.com/music. And stay tuned in a week. By the end of this week, by December 19th, my first ever Christmas song. Yes, I've finally done it. And those are kind of my promos and all that stuff. Thank you for always hanging out with that. It's important to me. That's why I put it up front. It's important to this show to keep it going. And the music is important and all of that. So I appreciate your patience. And hopefully you're taking me up on some of those offers. So this week's episode topic, again, is nostalgia, the silent killer. It's Music is Everything number 38. So it's the 38th installment of my sub-series wherein I give some opinions on a general topic instead of specific music. And in this case, it is nostalgia. So why do I call it the silent killer? Well, let me, full disclosure, I've had a problem with nostalgia forever. I have struggled with it myself. And I have a major problem with it when other people overindulge in nostalgia. And hopefully this episode will help explain why I feel so strongly about it. And it is a personal thing. Everyone experiences nostalgia. Everyone. I do. You right there do. It is a part of the human experience. But the more I encounter it, both within myself and in the world, the more I'm convinced that it's a silent killer. It robs us of our enjoyment of actual life. There are other pros and cons to it, and I'm not going to say any more until later on when we really get into the meat of it. So the show format, I'm going to start with what is nostalgia, including a definition and a history, and then what's good about nostalgia, all the pros, what's not good about nostalgia, the cons. If I can't say the word that's the topic of this week's episode, I'm in trouble. And then some conclusions, including how you can use nostalgia well if you so choose. And it's not that we choose, it happens involuntarily for the most part. Anyway, but we'll get there. And then the featured song, and then questions for you. And this week's bonus MXtra at patreon.com/musicisnotagenre goes beyond being a music fan. As fans, we all experience nostalgia. Goes beyond being a person in the world who experiences something from a previous part of your life and has warm feelings about it. The bonus MXtra at patreon.com/music is not a genre dives into how nostalgia affects music creators, singer-songwriter producers, and how it can actually kill your music career. If you let it run rampant, I'm going to go over all of the finer points of that. And if you're a music creator who right now is making new music and wants to be successful at it right now, this is a bonus you are going to want to check out. So bonus MXtra, patreon.com/music is not a genre. Some sources, not very many. Wikipedia, Google, Oxford English Dictionary, and, definition and all that stuff. Some disclaimers and some warnings. I do back up my opinion with studies and facts and research, but as mentioned, it's a personal take. I'm going to relate this topic to things beyond music, as I tend to do in most of my episodes, and that will include political and social issues, or at least the realm of politics and society. Though I do get into the history and origin of nostalgia and the related terms, this is not a language podcast. It is also not a medical or historical podcast. I do cover some of all of that. I'm going to touch on the points enough to illustrate for the purposes of this thing that I'm laying out here. I guess you can call it an argument. So why don't we get right into it? What is nostalgia? So first, the definition, including a word origin, which I find to be one of the most important things here. According to Wikipedia, nostalgia is a sentimental longing for the past, typically for a period or place with happy personal associations. So if I just left it there, you might think, okay, so what? What's the big deal? How could that be a silent killer? Little looking back, never hurt anyone, so I guess this whole episode is pointless, and good night, everybody. I will see you next week. No, there is way more to it than that. And to get there, I'm going to start with a brief prehistory of nostalgia, and then a history, including what words and phrases took the place of nostalgia in ways that now limit its meaning. So before there was nostalgia, there was melancholy. Now, you may not understand why I'm bringing this up. They seem like two different things. You'll hear why. We think of these words as simply emotions or states of mind, states of being, but they were both once considered medical terms, formal medical terms. Melancholy was coined by the ancient Greeks to describe a physical state of being that induced depression. It was thought to be caused by an imbalance of fluids, particularly too much black bile. Boy, have I felt that. From which the word is derived, melancholy, black bile, in Greek language. Basically, it was a precursor to depression, but it was also a precursor to nostalgia. Now, how can that be? Because anybody who knows these words would associate melancholy and depression. I know, and you may know, they aren't the same thing, and depression is now a clinical term. Melancholy really isn't anymore, but you can see the association. But how are they associated with nostalgia? Well, nostalgia was coined in the late 17th century by a medical student. And as with many words during the Enlightenment, scholars would use ancient Greek and or Latin roots to make the word seem more learned and formal. And so many of those have been handed down to us that we kind of forget that's where they came from, and that's the period that many of them came from. And in this case, nostalgia comes from two Greek words. And like I said, pay very close attention to this because it is more or less the linchpin of my argument in a sense. It really helps to tie it all together. Those two Greek words are nostos, which literally means homecoming, but more generally means returning. So, coming home, returning, remembering, and algos, meaning pain. So when you hear neuralgia, things like that algia means pain. So a pain in the brain or whatever, pain with the neurons, with the nerves and all of that. So nostalgia has often been translated to mean the pain of returning or the pain of remembering. That is, the pain of mentally going back. And so you can see now why this was considered to be a form of melancholy and how it's associated with melancholy and depression, because right there in the word, is the root word pain. Pain. The pain of remembering. Any of us who have experienced nostalgia know what that pain feels like. There's a bittersweetness to remembering fond things and people and places and stuff that you can never get back, or a part of your life you can never get back. Things like that. And we'll get more into that later. But this was considered at the time to be a form of melancholy specific to soldiers at war wishing they were back home, and then coming home and still feeling like they couldn't shake the feeling even though they were home. Does this sound familiar? Can you think of other terms that now and since then might apply to this? And I will tell you some of those. So at its origin, and for at least a couple of centuries, nostalgia was considered 100% negative. It was a diagnosable mental condition that debilitated people, often to the point of death. Now, if I were, being glib, I could just say, there you go. There's my argument. There's nostalgia. It's bad. Made people kill themselves. But no, because we know things have changed in terms of the meaning of the word and all of that. And that's why there's an entire podcast episode devoted to this. We're going to come back to this point. But first, let's move forward in time to other terms that eventually took the place of nostalgia, as I mentioned. Both nostalgia and melancholy persisted as the go-to terms, especially for soldiers, at least through the mid-19th century, such as, for Civil War veterans and that period. By the time of World War II, terms like shell shock, battle fatigue, combat stress reaction, war neurosis replaced the older words, focusing more on the negative effects of war. These terms were eventually updated even further in 1980, or at least formally in 1980, in the DSM-3, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, whatever. We're up to the 5th edition now, I believe. My brother's in that field, so you can tell me if you're listening, bro. Around 1980, that's when that DSM-3 came out, and it was updated to PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And that term has even more recently been further destigmatized with updated versions, such as PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury, or simply post-traumatic stress, PTS, getting rid of the word disorder so it doesn't have that negative connotation. Although all three of those are still used, and PTSD is still probably the most prominent. And I never thought of it as something to apply a negative to a person. Yes, the feeling is negative, the experience is negative, but I didn't think that the phrase itself denigrated the person, but some people do, so they've started to make changes to that phrase. What these updates helped to do from World War II on was separate the original ideas of melancholy and nostalgia from more clinical and specific terms like those we've discussed. And like shell shock and battle fatigue were used for decades. I remember those from when I was a kid. PTSD, I didn't really become aware of till probably the 1980s, mid-80s at least, if not later. And other non-war traumatic situation-specific terms like anxiety and depression were also separated from the ideas of melancholy and nostalgia. So they slowly lost their formality and became kind of the layman's terms for, feeling some sense of sadness or pain. And of course, more specific than that. And when that separation happened, melancholy lost its teeth and is now seen as kind of the blahs. It's been romanticized. The poets are melancholy, and that's where they get their deep poetry and all this stuff. You're lost in sadness and overthinking things. So it's still negative, of course. Melancholy is not considered positive, but it's also not considered serious in and of itself, and it's usually a passing thing. If it's not, of course, then it's depression, and that's why there's that difference there. So nostalgia went a different way. Melancholy is still negative. Nostalgia took on a rosier connotation, as the Oxford English Dictionary says, a sentimental longing or wistful affection for the past, typically for a period or place with happy personal associations. So it is no longer considered strictly negative. In fact, and the whole reason I'm doing this episode is that most people would hear the word nostalgia and they wouldn't think of it as negative. They would think of it as like, oh, the dog I used to own that passed away or died, and family and friends who have died or moved on to some other area of the country and maybe you don't see or talk to them anymore. And again, we all experience this, but that's really not the point of this episode. This point is to illustrate that nostalgia isn't just the warm fuzzies. There's more to it than that. It's actually, I think, far more negative, or at least has the potential to do much more harm than good. And I'm going to show you how. But to do that and to be thorough, I'm going to start with how nostalgia can be a good thing, both in general life and as a music fan, which, of course, the bonus MXtra goes even further, as I said, than the fan, and talks about nostalgia's effects on music creators and their careers. Bonus MXtra at patreon.com/music is not a genre. So let's get into this first very vital part of this argument, which is what's good about nostalgia. It would be unfair and unnecessarily biased to characterize as fully negative something that people get so much pleasure from. Also, if you're making an argument, and this, oh man, let me tell you, people who are so poor at arguing. I took a class in college called Logic, Reason, and Persuasion, and the whole idea there is you need to understand and know and even make a counter argument to your point in order to illustrate potential pitfalls for yourself, etc., but also the full picture. That strengthens your actual argument. So that's partly why I'm doing it, but also just to be thorough. In other words, in order to understand the darkness, you have to know the light. So let's break this down and start with some of the positive effects of nostalgia. So what's good? And this applies to nostalgia of all kinds, not just for music. First of all, it gives you a soft landing into past memories of good things, reflecting and reviewing warm feelings, soporific, drug-like. Puts you in a state that feels a little bit, druggy in a sense, especially if it persists. It's a safe escape if you need to disconnect from present difficulties for however long that period is. It's grounding during times of stress and uncertainty. Familiar songs can do this. So you hear a song that you absolutely loved and will always love, and it can lift your spirits when they need lifting, or if you're already, happy or whatever, it can just cause a feeling of nostalgia and bring that back. Remembering past good times as well. Another positive is it can strengthen connection through a shared past experiences. Whether that is a song or a world event, there's a sense of community and belonging. When a song comes on in public that most of the people in that situation know, we experience that rush of emotion together. Some we might even sing along, we might dance, whatever it is, whether this is a party or, you're on the subway and somebody plays a well-known song that most of us like. That's the same for remembering an event we all went through. And honestly, that can be an event as kind of disruptive and traumatic as 9/11 or the pandemic. But of course, in most cases here, we're talking about an event of, I remember that anniversary party we all went to 10 years ago or something like that. So that connection there. Another positive, it promotes continuation of established traditions, routines, customs, heritage. In music, that means honoring past developments. Remembering when post-punk was big, or when, prog rock was big, or when EDM first came around and raves and things like that, or, you pick it, or the golden years of hip-hop, whatever they may be. In the world, it's respecting things like voting rights or supporting veterans, or the holidays, whether they are, national, non-denominational holidays or religious holidays. It promotes that nostalgia for the past experiences of those and understanding the good of those. It helps promote them, and through the future can even reinforce the whys. Why are these things so important or so good? This music was pivotal. It was great. It influenced so many other people. It supported me and so many others during, a time of development, whatever it is. Or this tradition or law that was passed has benefited society more than not. So another positive here is it can be a jumping off point for new things. new things. This old music inspires me to create something new that captures the same energy or aesthetic. This old tradition or law inspires me to morph it into something with the same spirit, but that acknowledges how the world has changed. And we can see that divide in the country and in the world at large when people who are more traditionalists, or in this country constitutionalists, whatever you want to say, where they say, no, the letter of the law said X, Y, Z, but and even I believe the founders would have said this, or some of them, it's the spirit of the law that matters the most. Why was that law established at that time? How can that apply to today's situation? So that's the positive of being able to understand that is a jumping off point by using nostalgia to remember why it was made in the first place. Another positive, it reminds you of who you were, connects you to important parts of yourself, either to recapture things you want to that you feel may have been lost in the shuffle of life, or to illustrate how far you've come from the things you don't want to recapture. But remembering those times, and it's actually harder to remember the second part, the things that you didn't like about times, and we'll get to that in a little bit later. But either way, that remembering helps you understand that you've come a long way, or you've come to a certain distance. All of these are pluses. Just like with other things that feel good, when used properly, they can create new experiences that feel just as good. But the pitfall is in that last sentence, when used properly. Just like with drugs, any kind of drugs, legal, illegal, whatever, prescribed, non-prescribed, alcohol, caffeine, downers, uppers, whatever, food, even sex, work for a lot of people, exercise for a lot of people, overuse of any of these things can be detrimental, even though many of them have benefits, especially when they're used in place of growth and present experience. So let's examine how indulging in nostalgia can turn negative. So we talked about what's good about nostalgia. Here is what's not good about nostalgia. Well, first of all, it's not real. And it's not real for two reasons. A, the past is only a memory. It no longer exists. And B, and equally important, I think, it is severe rose-colored glasses. So in music, that means you think, oh man, the 1980s were the pinnacle of music. Everything that came after sucked. Or the 1990s. And I know people who believe both of those. I know people who believe that stopped being good in the 1970s, whatever. And there are people now who are like, well, the 2000s was the last time anything was, a good friend of mine in a band was like that. The last time any real presence that rock music had in the world was in the 2000s. So that's rose-colored glasses because that happened to be a period you liked and identify with and connected to more than subsequent periods. Even though the mix of good and bad, memorable and forgettable, impactful and ineffectual is always the same. Always the same. And I rarely say I'm an authority on anything, but I'm going to tell you with severe authority that the mix of good and bad is always the same, and specifically in music and art. In the world, it's thinking that the good old days were better, and we know a lot of people who feel that way, and that the way things have changed have made the world worse. And when things have tended to largely improve in the aggregate for most people, despite the fact that there are still major struggles throughout the world with individuals and groups of people, if you ever studied any, parts of history and compared them to today, you will find that on the whole, even though we're in a relatively dark period now, things are better now than they were way back when in the so-called good old days. Another negative, when your hindsight is rose-colored, you forget what was bad about the past. I mentioned this earlier, and you separate yourself from that suffering. So, for example, people who say the 1980s had amazing music, yes, it did. But the mid to late 80s also had some pretty terrible production values and some other things. Now, again, say that about any era. I'm just singling this out as a point of maybe I love the 80s and you forget the bad parts of it. Another example from the world, all past eras have seen more discrimination and abuse than now. We're feeling a lot of pain right now, many of us. But and I don't I don't discount that pain. That's still suffering. It still is a point of saying the world isn't right yet. It's not perfect. It's never going to be, but it can improve and should improve far more than it is now. But we often forget that it was far worse in the past. It stops you, another negative, it stops you from growing and exploring and changing, which prevents you from discovering things that could potentially be even better than the past. Yes, I did say that. In music, it means you just stop listening to new things and thus stop believing anything new has any value to you or anyone else. And you may be that kind of person. I've talked about this in other episodes. Are you the person who, if you feel that the music you like stopped, at a certain decade, then that means that you can objectively say that no good music has been made after that? Then you're crazy. Because I have opinions about music that I prefer, whatever, but I am never going to say that music that was made differently at the same time afterwards before is any worse. In the world, it means you don't understand how changes since your perceived best days have made the world better. So every new change that's proposed, you become even more resistant to, and then you get defensive about the past, which creates reactionary politics. Which they come from an over-reverence for nostalgia. That really was what it is, that whole good old days feeling, missing out on the suffering. And I'm not just talking about the suffering of people who aren't you. Certain things ebb and flow. The economy is worse now than it was at certain periods in the past, but that's been true since forever. The general aggregate, again, is that things are largely better for the majority of people. And listen, nostalgia is actually a form of self-abuse. It's a pining for something you can never have again. You can't go back. You want the feeling or circumstance back that if it did come back, it wouldn't be the same anyway, because you're not the same person. You would probably be disappointed. In music, that's believing you can never have the feelings you get from old songs with anything new. And I can tell you that's not true. I can tell you that, in fact, I have heard songs from 2025 that give me tingles in a very similar way to songs from my childhood, adolescence, 20s, 30s do. And you're robbing yourself of new experiences, new music experiences. In the world, it's believing we had it right back whenever and being fully resistant to any new policies or social changes. So if that's you, you're probably a rockist as well. I don't know. I have no idea. I can't see you from on the other side of this camera, and I can't hear you from the other side of the mic. This creates disillusionment, pessimism, cynicism, anger toward the current state of things. For example, rock doesn't exist or doesn't matter anymore. Rock is dead. It isn't what it used to be. All of that is bullshit. Government and social institutions, groups, or policies aren't as good as they were and don't serve you the way they used to. Medical advancements don't matter anymore, things like that. You look at the past so simply because you already went through it, and you reduce it to what you remember. And largely what you remember is the good stuff. That's part of the human survival instinct. And disdain the present because it's too complicated, it's too raw, it's too painful. When in reality, the levels of complexity and simplicity are always the same, regardless of how they shift. Progressive rock was the height of music creation. People might believe this. And I love some progressive rock, but there are people who believe this. Listen, I'll tell you this, prog rock fans. Listen to some modern pop with open ears. Listen to some modern hip hop and other kinds of music with open ears and really listen. And you will hear how progressive rock has affected all of it since its heyday. And in fact, there have been books written on that. In the world, taxes and laws and social norms, such as new gender labeling and new identity and all of that stuff, they're too much for me to handle. But what we forget is that there was something 100% very similar in every era. Every era has its struggles. Every era is like, well, the accepted term for, black people in America was Negro, and then black, and then African American. And, I can't make that change, okay, so we can talk about race. We can talk about, calling people of the Jewish faith, Jewish people instead of Jews, which that's not necessarily a slur, but in some, circumstances it might be seen as such. And we can talk, and that's all very similar to what we're going through with the, they, them, and gender and all of that stuff. You've made the decision to stop growing. That's all it is. It's not that anything is all that different. Vaccines, scary. They don't work. We don't need them. We're all healthy. When even boomers and people older than that will tell you what we had to go through as a society before vaccines were widespread, how much unnecessary death there was, and how that unnecessary death has been returning because people are dismissing vaccines as useful. We forget progress and take for granted that things are the way they are now because of that progress, and not just because that's how things work now and, we're out of the woods and it's never going to happen again. Don't regress. It takes you out of the present moment, nostalgia. It makes you look down on and not appreciate your current world because it can't live up to some perceived halcyon day. It separates you from people around you. As a result of that, either because they're living in the now and you're not, or because their nostalgia can never be the same as yours. Nostalgia is a room for one, both of which lead to disconnection, missed opportunities for things like bliss and growth, new, wonderful experiences, and too much echoing of the past. So in music, it's being way too faithful to past styles to the point of co-opting, and too much interpolation and being afraid to say and do something new, either 100% new or old things in new ways. Same with movies and TV shows. There are some reboots that are just echoes. There are other reboots that bring something new. In politics and society, it's trying to solve today's problems with yesterday's solutions that is worth repeating. You cannot solve today's problems with yesterday's solutions. Today is not yesterday. There are different considerations, different facts and facets. You can modify yesterday's solutions to fit today's problems, but you can't just put a rubber stamp old solution onto a new problem. So with all the positives and negatives laid out, what's the end result? What side wins? Why do I say nostalgia is a silent killer? You're going to find out right after this mid-roll break. Talk to you in a minute. Hey, thanks for checking out this episode of Music is Not a Genre. If you'd like to learn more about this podcast, if you'd like to learn more about the music I do with my band Rec or any other projects or anything else about me, go to nickdematteo.com. That's Nick, DEMATTEO.com. And everything is there. There's even a link to a merch store where you can get t-shirts and mugs and hats and totes and notebooks and so many other things. I'm always adding new products there. Great way to support the podcast. And finally, go to patreon.com/music is not a genre if you'd really like to show your support. My fans and lovely family there get exclusives and other perks and early releases, and they get to suggest topics for future podcasts as well. Thanks for listening to the mid-roll. Now back to the show. All right, we are back. 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 Sometimes I hear my own voice and say, "Oh yeah, I'm still from Philadelphia," and I elide things in a certain way, even though I do voiceovers and very different accents and all that stuff. I'm sorry. Why am I making this about me when it's really about you and us getting to the conclusions here? We laid out the definition, the history of nostalgia, the pros and cons. So here are some conclusions, which will include ways that you can actually use nostalgia, no matter what I say. Why is nostalgia the silent killer? And why is that not hyperbole? So think of nostalgia as a drug. As we know, drugs can be beneficial. They can be vital and necessary. They can help you feel good. They can cure you. They can help you feel very good and cure some really tough things. But used incorrectly, such as for the wrong reasons, maybe you don't need the drug you're taking, or you're using the wrong kind of drug for the symptom, or you use it for too long, you're getting used to and becoming dependent on the drug's effects. Keep that in mind as we talk about nostalgia. Or you're using too much of it, overdosing. Keep that in mind too. Any of those ways, drugs can be highly damaging. My argument rests on the fact that it is too easy for us to sleep. Yes, that is a Freudian slip. It's too easy for us to slip into the sweet sleep of nostalgia. That emotionally, we are all too prone to be addicts for the stuff that made us feel good. To trust that just a little nostalgia is okay if I just have a little bit of it. Like when you open a bag of chips, bet you can't eat just one. Or like I said, people who have issues with alcohol or drugs or anything like that, any kind of addictions. Nostalgia is the same way. Social media addictions, things like that. Some of us can do it. Some of us can do it. And I say some, and I include myself in that because I am lucky in that I have never had an addictive personality for anything. For the most part, anyway, anything damaging. I've never had an addictive personality. And even when I, binge TV or whatever it is, I know a limit. I know when to be like, okay, now I need to cut that out, stop that. And I'm not saying that makes me better. It makes me luckier. That's not a struggle I have to go through. There are people, as you know, and you may be one of them, who have addictive personalities, whether it's for one thing or many things. But because I don't dwell in the realm of nostalgia for too long, even when it feels really good. And I have felt amazingly good from some things. There are old songs that I love that it brought up in a certain context, whether I see it in a film or TV or with a person, in a situation, make me cry, tear up, whatever it is, feel feelings of euphoria. So I know that feeling, but it's just not a place I dwell in for very long. Most of us can't control that, frankly. That doesn't mean most of us are addicts. There's a sliding scale of that. But most of us don't want to give up that feeling. And many, if not most of us, find every excuse to go back to that warm, nostalgic feeling and or to just stay there and build your life around it. Build your life around the past. I don't like that because it makes me feel like I'm missing out on the present and the life experience. And also because I know deep down that what I'm experiencing is gone. It will never come back. It will never be the same. It is not real. That is the past. As real as the emotions themselves are, the emotions are real. The memories as memories are real. But the things themselves and the situations and people now, not real anymore. So part of this concluding section will be laying out ways you can safely use and experience nostalgia that will benefit you beyond the good feeling. So I don't want to end on a negative. To do that, let me first go through the conclusions on both sides and my final words on the subject, and then we'll get to ways you can use nostalgia for good. So conclusions on the positives and negatives of nostalgia. Positives, nostalgia strengthens identity and belonging. Politically and socially, it provides a sense of continuity and community. Artistically, it gives creators a stable reference point and emotional resonance. And as I said, the bonus extra at patreon.com/music is not a genre. I'm going to go way more into the pros and cons of nostalgia for creators too, and how you have to be super careful with that. And number 2, nostalgia fuels creative reinvention. In music and art, backward glances become source material for hybrid sounds, retro aesthetics, reinterpretations that feel both familiar and fresh. If any of you are watching the final season of Stranger Things, you understand retro aesthetics. Number 3, it anchors people during change. Politically and socially, nostalgia can reduce anxiety by reminding individuals that challenges have been faced and overcome before. Artistically, if you're someone who loved a certain kind of music, but then you hear it echoed in more recent music, that anchors you too, even though other things are changing. There are a lot of artists who are doing grunge, neo-grunge, or neo-emo, or whatever it is, coming at it from a different angle, but the way they're doing it is so reminiscent of the things I loved from the past that I can now experience it anew with new songs, and it's grounding. Number 4, another positive, shared nostalgia builds bonds. Across culture, it unites people through common memories, genres, eras, movements, historical moments, which can spark collaboration and collective identity. So those are some of the positive conclusions. Some negative conclusions. Number 1, nostalgia distorts reality and idealizes the past. So these are summaries of the things I said before as a reminder of what the argument is here. Politically, this can fuel quote-unquote golden age thinking that ignores past inequities. Talked about that. Artistically, it can limit originality when creators rely too heavily on replication. In terms of a fan, you just tune yourself out from anything new that's come out, unless it is a cover of something that you already liked or a complete retread. Number two, it can hinder progress. Socially and politically, nostalgia can promote resistance to necessary change, to responding to the times as they are now, not the times as they were. In music and art, it may produce cycles of recycling rather than innovation. We talk about reboot culture and all of that. And, as a fan, listeners, your listening experience, you curate that. You decide what you do and don't want to listen to. So if you are stuck in nostalgia, you are deciding tacitly or consciously to not absorb new things. So it's hindering your own development progress as far as experience. Number three, nostalgia can become escapism. Personally, socially, and creatively, people may avoid present challenges or experimentation by retreating into comfort zones. And that, to me, if you're not growing, if you hit a place of stagnancy, whether it's physically, you're not exercising, you've put on weight, or, in an unhealthy way, or whatever it is, or mentally you stop reading up on new things, or you stop listening or watching new things, whatever it is, to me, that stagnation is the same as just saying, I'm ready to die now. It really, that's how it feels to me. That's how I see it in other people. It's a bit of an exaggeration, but I do see people slowly slide into that state of the lively part of my life, the vibrant part is past, and I'm just ready to call it, whenever that happens. Number four, it polarizes world views. Political nostalgia can divide generations or groups based on conflicting memories of how things were, reinforcing cultural tension rather than mutual understanding. We're living that right now. And we're trying to figure out a way forward. As far as being a music fan, it has put dividers between me and other people, and vice versa, I would imagine, because I am not the most up person on current things, but up enough to be able to talk to just about anybody about it and understand the music and where it's coming from. And there are many things that have come out, which, by the way, next week's episode is on my 2025 playlist, and I'll talk about some of the amazing music that's come out in 2025. But when I'm talking to a person who's like, well, I stopped listening to music at X time and nothing good has come out, I feel like my choices are either to try to have a conversation anyway and illustrate, well, what about this? What about that? Which usually fails, or to just stop talking about music. So it does create a divide. The integrated takeaway of these positives and negatives is that nostalgia is powerful, and it's a coin. It's got two sides to it. At its best, it roots people, it strengthens identity, it fuels creativity and builds community. And at its worst, it distorts the past, limits innovation, reinforces division, and encourages retreat from the present. And the impact depends on whether nostalgia is used, and I love this, as a reference point for growth or a refuge from change. So now here's where the rubber meets your ass, or whatever the saying is. You can correct me. The effects we're talking about are all, like I said, flip sides of the same coins, meaning they can be productive or destructive. There is a neutrality to the existence of most things, the existence of nostalgia, the existence of nuclear power, the existence of social media, the existence of AI even. Generally speaking, these things are neutral. It's how they are used that make them positive or negative. Same with nostalgia. So some dual effects. The desire for community and stability can inspire positive community building, or it can lead to exclusionary thinking. You're in this group, you're not in that group, you're not in my group, depending on how the nostalgia is framed. Valuing traditional norms is a double-edged sword. It can preserve meaningful cultural values, which no matter where we come from, that's important to all of us, not just to conservatives. There are people on the progressive side. You need to be honest about the fact there are things that you do value as traditions, or it can create rigidly social roles and limit individual expression, which we're struggling with now. Emotional comfort as decision fuel. So nostalgia can help people make decisions that feel authentic because they're connected to authentic parts of themselves from the past, or bias them toward familiar but outdated approaches. Well, this worked for me. And I talk about this with my wife all the time. and I think I've said it on the podcast before, where people say, "Oh, life is cyclical. It's a circle," and it is cyclical. You often come back to certain points, and that reminds you of when you were there before. But it's not a circle; it's a spiral. And if you are lucky, and honestly, even if you're not, just based on life experience, it's an upward spiral. You've learned more. You've gotten more skills. You have different perspectives. So you come back to the same place, but it's not exactly the same. And that's where that double edge is. It is the same place. There's a nostalgia element to it, but with different elements to it. How do you move forward with that? So if this is all the case, then if even the positive effects can slide into negativity, my argument here is that anything more than a healthy amount, periodic, small dose of nostalgia, anything more than that is a net negative. And here are some points to illustrate why. Nostalgia is a refuge. It becomes more harmful than helpful. It has real emotional value. Let's not dismiss that. We know it does. But when it becomes a retreat from change rather than a reflection on what's meaningful, it shifts from grounding to limiting. You know, people talk about Mercury retrograde and whatever, and then there's all these rewords, reflection and remembering and all that stuff, and sometimes regression, whatever. But the idea of using that period, if you believe in it, and I'm not saying I do, is that you are using that reflection to help you understand what you need to do to move forward. So that would be the reflection positive way to use nostalgia, as opposed to going backward and say, I'm safer there, when there is no there anymore. Across political beliefs, social behavior, and artistic expression, an escape into the past tends to create more distortions than insight, more stagnation than inspiration. So nostalgia idealizes a past that never fully existed. When used as a refuge, nostalgia is rarely about the past itself. It's about a selectively edited version of the past, one that reduces or eliminates the conflicts, exclusions, and complexities. So politically, this can fuel a return to how things used to be. We're hearing a lot of narratives that ignore progress or the lived experiences of those marginalized in that old system. Socially, it encourages believing that relationships, communities, or norms were healthier way back when, even when they weren't. And in terms of being a fan or an artist, it romanticizes eras of music or culture while minimizing how experimental, controversial, or disruptive those eras actually were at the time. They're safe now because we went through them and we've subsumed them. But there was a lot of, the responses to when rock and roll first came out or hip hop first came out and became popular, or any of those things, or when music shifted heavily to electronic instead of organic instruments. We accept most, if not all of those as, yeah, that's music. Not at the time. Nostalgia as escape undermines adaptation. When nostalgia becomes a shield against change, it weakens the ability to respond creatively and constructively to the world as it is. Political attitudes may resist new ideas simply because they're new, not because they're flawed. And, all ideas are flawed to some degree or another. In terms of politically, there's always going to be some chinks in the armor. But if you're the kind of person that's like, it is a new idea, I'm not even going to listen to it, that's nostalgia taking over. Social attitudes may cling to outdated norms, expecting modern life to operate using old frameworks. This is the gender thing, among other things, LGBTQ+, whatever, so many other things even beyond that. If you're resisting that, you're living in the world of nostalgia. Music and art may devolve into endless revival cycles, avoiding innovation for the comfort of familiar sounds and styles, which I'm going to go over in the bonus MxG at patreon.com/music is not a genre, how we often get stuck in those cycles. And this creates a loop where the past is overvalued and the present undervalued. Nostalgia reinforces tribalism and polarization. A refuge mindset tends to divide the world into people who remember the right way and people who are ruining everything. So politically, this hardens ideological lines and turns disagreement into identity conflict. Socially, it fuels resentment towards younger generations, immigrants, or anyone seen as a threat to the old way. Artistically, it can lead to gatekeeping. Real music ended in year X, which discourages exploration and growth, whether you're a fan or an artist. And in this mode, nostalgia isn't bonding, it's exclusionary. It offers comfort without solutions. Nostalgia feels good, but it rarely gives actionable guidance because the thing you're thinking about doesn't exist in that way anymore. It's hard to apply whatever it was then to now. It can soothe political frustration without addressing the causes. It can comfort people socially while keeping them stuck in patterns that no longer fit their lives. It can emotionally reward artists, but creatively trap them, preventing evolution. Again, bonus MxG, patreon.com/music-is-not-a-genre. I know artists who are stuck like this. I'm going to talk about that. It is emotional anesthesia, relief without repair. I've said that before in one way or another. It undermines the possibility of a better future. Most progress, social, political, artistic, comes from imagining what doesn't exist yet, what could improve. Nostalgia, when used defensively, does the opposite. It anchors imagination to what's already been done. So you're thinking, well, the good parts of life have already passed. Nothing that comes after is going to be as good as that. Then you're immediately undermining the fact that the future could be better. And that's so anti the way I think. Politically, it can suppress reforms needed to address new realities. Socially, it limits growth in identity, growth in relationships, and community structures. In music and art, it can stall aesthetic innovation and reduce culture to pastiche, both for the listener and creator. Cost of looking backward is the loss of what could be happening and existing moving forward. So getting to more conclusions, nostalgia as a refuge, creative, social, and political regression. That's what it mostly causes. Used thoughtfully, it can be grounding and creatively inspiring. But when it becomes a refuge from change, it tends to distort reality, resist adaptation, deepen division, block innovation, and normalize stagnation disguised as comfort, which is the one that hurts me the most. I see it in people I love. Stagnation disguised as comfort. In this defensive mode, nostalgia doesn't protect people from the world. It limits their ability to participate in it, to connect with it. The past may feel safer, but staying there ultimately prevents the growth, creativity, resilience, and new experience needed to build something better. So to close, I have two final, very short conclusions, one negative, one positive. So first, negative. It is just too dangerous to accept nostalgia as a regular day-to-day and moment-to-moment response. No matter what rush of good and warm feelings you get, you're basing those feelings on things that no longer exist or maybe never did in the way you remember them. And you're divorcing yourself from connecting to things and people in the present. So unless you can indulge sparingly and or counteract it with connecting with present arts, culture, politics, and society, it will eventually pull you down into a half-dream state and kill you. Nostalgia truly is the silent killer. Good night. No, but since I hate to end on a negative note, even though it's important to point out negatives, here is my absolute final and actually positive conclusion and takeaway. Just like with drugs, food, sex, social media, media of any kind, and pretty much anything that makes us feel a little too good, you can learn how to indulge without overdoing it. So first, here are some steps. Awareness, they always say, is the first step. Be aware it's happening. When you have a feeling that pulls you backward in time, note it. Second, examine the good feeling. How does it make you feel? Fully enjoy it even, so you get that comprehensive experience and the benefits. And then ask, what's so great about it? Why does it make you feel that way? Why is that memory so wonderful? Third, examine why it happened. What happened that triggered it? Was it a new song that was like, oh, but that's not as good as this old song? Was it an old song? Was it something in the news? Ask yourself what feeling or experience or thought you might be running away from or avoiding by allowing nostalgia to take over. Fourth, ask yourself if this is the only way you can feel that feeling, by being nostalgic. And if your answer is yes, ask yourself why you think that's true, because it's not. You can feel it in many other ways that don't have anything to do with nostalgia. They have to do with the present moment. Then try to reconnect with the present experience that triggered that feeling, even if it's uncomfortable and you don't like it, and see if there's a way you can reinterpret it and reframe it. So, oh, I hate that new song. Was there something in it? And why did I hate it? Well, maybe it reminded you of an old song you hated and blows your mind, where you're like, maybe there are other new songs that remind you of old songs that you would like. Fifth, if you can't reinterpret it, acknowledge that it's not for you and move on. That meaning that negative present experience, just say, no, you don't have to accept everything. But then try to find other present day experiences that you can connect with, ways you can integrate the past with the present that will keep you connected to both. Let's honor the past. Let's remember it's a part of us, and let's integrate it into the present instead of just living there. And finally, note every time you feel nostalgia, and note the subject. Get a notebook and say, oh, I felt nostalgic about this at this time of day on this day because I heard this or saw this or read this. Determine if it's happening too much and work toward disciplining yourself to keep it in check and always have it propel you into some productive connection with the present. And as I said before, to strengthen those muscles of, all right, I indulge in nostalgia. Now, what can I do that indulges in something new, something present? I do everything I just mentioned, all those steps, I do it all the time because like I said, I experience nostalgia all the time. It sounds pretty laborious, but it's not. All those steps can happen very quickly, and eventually it becomes second nature the more you do it. Now, as I said, I'm not prone to long or large indulgences of nostalgia for the most part, so this isn't as hard for me as it will be for others, but it's still not a snap. I struggle sometimes, and to not slowly become out of touch with the present and only real world, which is the present, I do have to consciously acknowledge my moments of nostalgia and then find ways to counteract it. And by the way, the bonus MxG at patreon.com/music is not a genre applies all of these skills directly to music creation. If you're a music creator, you're going to want to check it out. And this is basically how I make music, that integrating the past with the present, which, speaking of, featured song. Yeah, let's get something straight. There have been and still are a really, really, really small percentage of musicians who don't indulge in some form of nostalgia. In fact, I would say every musician does at some point. I'm definitely not one of those who doesn't. There are lots of times of music I look back on in ways that get me pumped. And that looking back absolutely informs how I make music. So that said, I'm not really capable of creating a carbon copy of something else from an organic place unless I'm asked to do that. I have too many influences, and those influences stretch over decades and genres, and they get all mixed together. And I'm not interested in trying to create something that has no connection to anything else, partly because I'm not the person who needs every second of every piece of music to be new and innovative, and partly because it's actually impossible for anyone on Earth who's encountered anyone else on Earth to make something that isn't somehow influenced by something that came before. So point made. Now to the actual featured song. It is a song called Fall from Rex's first album, Parts and Labor. And I chose it because the lyrics are about the struggle we all have to embrace change, to actively seek out and welcome change, and how we tend to allow our fears of the new and unknown to prevent us from growing and experiencing more of life. So here's a lyric quoted from the song, second verse, I believe, end of the second verse. And you can never let it go, better than the devil you don't know. So it's the idea of the safe thing, even if it's not a great thing and it's not helping you, it's safer than the thing you don't know. The chorus and the bridge, though, encourage us to fall forward into the unknown. And once you do, it's not going to hurt the way you think it will. You can finally let go of the pains of the past and actively living in the past and experience the present in ways you never thought you could. In fact, here's a bridge quote. All you say you sent away will never disappear until you fall. So those things you think you left behind aren't going to leave you until you find a way to move forward. You can't heal the old wounds or learn how to feel and be better. Surrender to the unknown. Musically, it's inspirational. It's driving. It has elements of U2 and The Killers and even a smidge of certain types of the Matthew Sweet songs and power pop and a little bit of emo. It was once chosen, and yet it's not exactly like any of those things, just to be clear, and you tell me what you think of that pastiche. It was once chosen to be part of an Israeli workout mix. Yeah. Tell me if you think that was a good choice for them. And tell me what you think of the music itself. Does it smack of too much nostalgia, or is just the right amount? Is it mixed the old with the new, whatever? And you can do that by, please click the link and stream it wherever you stream music, and like it and share it and playlist it. It helps. But you can also just hang out another minute, because you're going to hear it right after these questions. For you, are you a generally nostalgic person? Are you nostalgic often? Even the new things you choose because they're reminiscent of past things? Do you indulge in nostalgia only from time to time? Oh, that great song. Okay, that's great, but let's go listen to this new album I have on my list or whatever. Or do you mostly live in the past and you don't choose anything new? You just watch reruns and listen to old music and all of that stuff. How does nostalgia make you feel about the present? That may be the most important question here in this entire episode. How does nostalgia make you feel about the present? Drop it in the comments, whether you're on YouTube or any of the streaming services. Let me know. I want a conversation about this. And finally, do you feel like nostalgia is a net positive or negative for you, and why? I may believe it's a silent killer, and I firmly believe that. But I also believe it's a tool and when used properly, can be a good thing and not as an end result. But how do you feel about it? What do you really think? I'd like to know the answer to all those questions and more, because my objectives here are music, conversation, and connection. Thank you for hanging with me for this 38th Music is Everything, which is chock full of information and opinion. And I will talk to you next week.
Crush that grows. It's something everybody knows. It's on you, can't you feel it now? Pushing you and you don't know how, but you wanna lose it all. All you have to do is fall. You find the break and you fall. You're wide awake and you nothing left for you to see. More of the same old misery, and you can never let it go. Better than the devil you don't know, but it's not like that at all. All you have to do is fall. You just lean forward and fall. Take one step over and fall. Face you fake, the walls you raise will crumble into you, and all you say you sent us.